So Turkey and Greece, two countries blessed with stunning coastlines, incredible food, and a shared history so complicated it makes the plot of a Christopher Nolan film look like a straightforward episode of Peppa Pig. And here we are, in 2025, and their relationship is still, to put it mildly, spicy. It's like watching two relatives at a wedding who've been feuding for generations. They'll smile for the family photo, maybe even clink glasses, but everyone knows that one wrong comment about a shared inheritance, or in this case, a tiny, uninhabited rock in the Aegean, could flip the entire dessert table over. Yes, there are diplomatic efforts. There are handshakes, meetings, and carefully worded statements about positive agendas and de-escalation. But underneath that thin veneer of civility, the pot is simmering, and it's being stirred by a ladle made of centuries-old grievances and brand-new power struggles. It's a rivalry fueled by everything from the ghosts of empires past to the very modern, very lucrative promise of natural gas hiding under the seabed. This isn't just a simple disagreement over a fence line. It's a deeply rooted, emotionally charged saga that's been playing out for centuries, and the latest season is just as dramatic as ever. So tonight, we're going to dive into this geopolitical hot tub, which, frankly, is less bubbly and relaxing and more scalding and full of unresolved tension. We'll look at why these two neighbours, these two NATO allies, just can't seem to get along. We'll unpack the history, the maritime maps that look like a toddler's scribble, the military hardware, and the stubborn nationalism that keeps this conflict on a perpetual low boil. Because understanding this is key to understanding a massive fault line running right through one of the world's most important military alliances. It's complicated, it's frustrating, and it's absolutely critical. To understand why a Greek politician might get twitchy about a Turkish drone, you first have to understand that they aren't just seeing a drone. They're seeing the culmination of centuries of, let's call it, unpleasantness. The story, of course, starts with the Ottoman Empire, which, for a very long time, included Greece. And while some might say, that was ages ago, get over it, history has a nasty habit of sticking around, like a piece of chewing gum on the shoe of geopolitics. The Greek War of Independence wasn't just a war, it was the foundational story for modern Greece, a narrative of throwing off an oppressive yoke. That kind of national trauma doesn't just fade away, it gets baked into the national identity. Then came the 20th century, which decided to crank the trauma dial up to 11. The Greco-Turkish War ended with the 1923 population exchange, a horrifically sanitized term for forcibly uprooting nearly 2 million people based on their religion. Imagine your government telling you, right, you, your family, your entire community, you have to leave the only home you've ever known because your grandparents went to a different building on Sundays. This event wasn't a footnote. It was a cataclysm that left deep scars on both sides, creating refugee populations whose stories of loss and dispossession have been passed down through generations. It's the historical poison that still contaminates the well of goodwill. And just when you thought things couldn't get more complicated, there's Cyprus. In 1974, following a Greek-backed coup, Turkey invaded and occupied the northern third of the island, and it's stayed that way ever since. A frozen conflict, a divided capital, a UN buffer zone, it's a constant festering wound in the middle of the Eastern Mediterranean. For Greece, it's an illegal occupation of a friendly state. For Turkey, it's a necessary intervention to protect Turkish Cypriots. For everyone involved, it's an intractable problem that serves as a permanent, high-stakes exhibit of their mutual distrust. These aren't just old stories. They are the very lenses through which Ankara and Athens view every single modern dispute. Now, let's talk about the Aegean Sea, or as I like to call it, the world's most beautiful, most disputed swimming pool. The core of the problem is that Greece and Turkey fundamentally disagree on where one country ends and the other begins. Greece, citing international law, claims that every single one of its thousands of islands, no matter how small, generates its own continental shelf and exclusive economic zone. This, if you look at a map, essentially turns the Aegean into a Greek lake, which to Turkey is, and I'm quoting their official position here, completely bloody ridiculous. Turkey argues that this interpretation unfairly boxes in its massive coastline. This isn't just an academic debate for maritime lawyers. It has very real, very loud consequences. Both countries claim overlapping airspace, leading to the absurd and dangerous spectacle of Turkish and Greek fighter jets constantly engaging in mock dogfights. They fly aggressively close to each other, testing reactions, asserting dominance in a high-speed, high-stakes game of "I'm not touching you." That could go catastrophically wrong with a single twitch of a joystick. It's the geopolitical equivalent of two drivers racing each other down a one-lane road, convinced the other will swerve first. It's happened thousands of times, and it's a miracle it hasn't ended in disaster more often. And then, someone found gas. The discovery of significant natural gas reserves in the eastern Mediterranean has poured rocket fuel onto this already raging fire. Suddenly, those abstract lines on a map represent billions, if not trillions of dollars in energy resources. Now, it's not just about national pride, it's about energy independence and economic fortune. Both countries have sent out survey ships, escorted by warships, into contested waters. Turkey's vessel, the Enduring Rivalry, became a household name, its every move tracked like a celebrity, its presence a direct challenge to Greek claims. The military presence in the Aegean has intensified from a tense standoff to a full-blown naval traffic jam, where everyone is armed to the teeth. Right, back to Cyprus. Because you can't talk about Greece and Turkey without talking about the island they both treat like the last piece of cake at a birthday party. As of 2025, the island remains stubbornly divided. You have the Republic of Cyprus in the south, an EU member, internationally recognized, and then you have the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is recognized by exactly one country. And if you guessed Turkey, congratulations, you win a stuffed animal that is also only recognized by Turkey. This division isn't just lines on a map, it's checkpoints, barbed wire, and two completely separate realities existing side by side. The international community has been trying to fix this for decades. There have been endless rounds of peace talks, sponsored by the UN, featuring earnest-looking diplomats and mountains of paperwork. The latest major effort collapsed spectacularly back in 2017, and a fresh push in 2024 went absolutely nowhere, with both sides essentially blaming each other for being unreasonable, which is the diplomatic equivalent of, "I know you are, but what am I?" The Greek Cypriots want a unified state, while the Turkish Cypriots, with Turkey's backing, are now pushing for a two-state solution, something the rest of the world sees as a non-starter. So the talks are dead, and the situation is more frozen than a Siberian winter. Meanwhile, Turkey isn't just sitting back. They have been doubling down on their presence in the north. We're talking new military bases, a drone airport, and significant infrastructure projects that tie the north ever closer to mainland Turkey. There's also the deeply controversial partial reopening of Varosha, a former ghost town resort, which the UN has repeatedly condemned. To Greece and the Republic of Cyprus, this is creeping annexation, a deliberate effort to make the division permanent. To Turkey, it's simply developing the territory and supporting the Turkish Cypriots. It's a slow-motion power play that makes any future reunification look less like a possibility and more like a historical fantasy. When diplomacy fails, or even when it's just taking a long lunch break, countries tend to communicate in a different language, the language of military hardware. And right now, Greece and Turkey are having a very loud, very expensive conversation. Greece, feeling the pressure and backed by European Union and United States support, has been on a shopping spree. We're talking state-of-the-art French Rafale fighter jets, new frigates and upgrades across the board. They are determined to maintain a qualitative military edge, sending a clear message to Ankara. Don't even think about it. It's a classic arms race, fueled by fear and broadcast on the evening news to boost national morale. Not to be outdone, Turkey has been busy revolutionizing its own military, with a particular focus on its domestic defense industry. Their calling card is, of course, the Bayraktar TB2 drone, the cheap, effective drone that gained global fame in Ukraine and elsewhere. Turkey has built a formidable drone fleet and is now a major exporter. They're also upgrading their navy with new ships and submarines, aiming to project power not just in the Aegean, but across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. This domestic production gives them a sense of self-sufficiency and defiance, particularly in the face of sanctions or arms embargoes from Western allies. It's their way of saying, "We don't need you, we can build our own toys." This military buildup is happening in a political climate that is, to put it gently, combustible. In both countries, ultranationalism is on the rise. Politicians on both sides find it very easy to score cheap points by talking tough about their historic rival. This is amplified by a media landscape that often fans the flames rather than promoting calm. Add to this a potent mix of anti-immigrant sentiment, with both countries on the front lines of migration routes, and you have a recipe for a political environment where compromise is seen as weakness. Leaders are trapped. Even if they wanted to be conciliatory, a significant portion of their electorate wants to see them standing firm, chest puffed out, ready for a fight. Now, for the part that gives NATO planners night terrors, both Greece and Turkey are in NATO. This is supposed to be a club of allies, a one for all for one security pact. But with these two, it's more like a dysfunctional family forced to sit at the same table for Thanksgiving, where one member is accusing the other of stealing the silverware while secretly trying to trip them on the way to the bathroom. The idea that two NATO members could come to blows is the alliance's ultimate nightmare scenario, a self-inflicted wound of catastrophic proportions. It forces every other member, especially the United States, into a deeply uncomfortable balancing act. This balancing act is incredibly difficult. On one hand, you have Greece, an EU member, which generally gets strong backing from Brussels. When tensions flare, the EU is quick to condemn Turkey's provocations and show solidarity with Greece, sometimes with the threat of sanctions. This reinforces Greece's position and makes it feel diplomatically secure. On the other hand, you have Turkey, a massive country with a powerful military that is strategically vital, controlling the Bosphorus Strait and bordering Syria and Iraq. The West, and particularly the United States, cannot afford to alienate Turkey completely, no matter how frustrated they get with its foreign policy. This leaves Turkey often feeling isolated and cornered, which, paradoxically, can make it even more assertive. It feels like the EU is ganging up on it, and the United States is an unreliable partner. This dynamic has led to some incredibly tense moments. There have been near collisions at sea that were so serious they prompted direct intervention from the NATO Secretary General, who had to get on the phone and basically tell both sides to knock it off. NATO has established a deconfliction mechanism, a sort of military hotline, to prevent accidents, but it's a technical fix for a deeply political and emotional problem. It's a bandage on a wound that refuses to heal. After a particularly frosty period, 2025 did see a glimmer of hope, or at least a glimmer of not actively shouting at each other. In the early part of the year, Greek and Turkish diplomats resumed what are known as exploratory talks. This is the diplomatic equivalent of agreeing to meet for coffee to talk about whether you should, at some point in the future, have a real meeting. The stated goal is simple: manage disagreements to avoid an accidental conflict and explore areas where they can actually cooperate, like trade and tourism, under a so-called positive agenda. The very fact that they are talking is, in itself, a minor victory. It lowers the temperature and provides a channel for communication beyond angry press releases and military posturing. These talks are designed to be low stakes, held away from the media glare, allowing for frank discussions on everything from maritime boundaries to airspace violations. The idea is to build a tiny bit of trust, to find some common ground, no matter how small, in the hopes that it can be built upon. It's a slow, painstaking process of trying to untangle a knot that has been tightening for decades. However, let's not break out the champagne just yet. So far, these talks have produced precisely 0 major breakthroughs. They agree to keep talking, which is nice, but they haven't solved any of the core issues we've discussed. Why? Because public opinion in both nations remains deeply skeptical, if not outright hostile, to any perceived concessions. Any leader who appears to be giving an inch to the other side risks being branded a traitor by political opponents and a nationalist press. So while the diplomats talk quietly behind closed doors, the fundamental dynamic of mutual suspicion and nationalist pressure hasn't changed a bit. They are talking about de-escalation, but both are still modernizing their armies just in case. So where does that leave us in 2025, in a state of frustrating, precarious stability? The relationship between Turkey and Greece is a paradox. They are talking, which is better than not talking. They are trying to build economic bridges, which is better than building naval blockades. The frantic, high-stakes brinkmanship of a few years ago has, for now, subsided into a more manageable, if still deeply tense, standoff. There is a mutual, rational understanding that an actual war would be an unmitigated disaster for both. A self-destructive act of monumental folly that would set both nations back decades. But rationality only gets you so far when you're dealing with issues this deeply embedded in national identity. The core disputes, the sovereignty of islands, the delimitation of the sea, the fate of Cyprus, remain completely unresolved. They are the third rails of politics in both countries, electrified by history and nationalism. No leader on either side has the political capital to offer the kind of sweeping compromises that would be needed for a lasting settlement. And the shifting sands of geopolitics, from energy competition in the Mediterranean to the broader tensions between Turkey and the West, constantly add new layers of complexity. Ultimately, while the dialogue continues and the fighter jets may be keeping a slightly safer distance, this rivalry is not going away. It is woven into the very fabric of these two nations. The best one can realistically hope for in the near future is not a grand resolution, but careful, pragmatic management of the conflict. The goal is to keep the simmering pot from boiling over, even if nobody knows how to turn off the stove. It's a tightrope walk with no end in sight, and the whole region is holding its breath, hoping neither side loses its balance.